Picture this: a U.S. carrier strike group cruising 1,000 kilometers off China's coast. Radar screens clear, defense systems online. Then a launch signature appears. The crew has 90 seconds before impact, not 90 minutes. 90 seconds. That's less time than it takes to read this introduction. China has deployed 2 hypersonic missile systems that render America's Pacific Fleet defenseless. The YJ-17 and YJ-19 don't just challenge carrier defenses, they exploit a deliberate gap in the architecture that the Pentagon knew existed but never fixed. These weapons move faster than human decision-making itself. By the time a commander understands what's happening, 10% of the response window has already vanished. What you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you understand naval warfare. Because Beijing hasn't just threatened carriers, they've made them mathematically impossible to defend. The YJ-17 exploits a fundamental vulnerability in U.S. missile defense that military planners have known about for years. This boost glide vehicle flies in what engineers call the dead zone, too low for exo-atmospheric interceptors like the SM-3, which engage targets outside Earth's atmosphere, yet too high for traditional air defense systems like the SM-2. At Mach 10, the YJ-17 crosses 1,000 kilometers in approximately 90 seconds. The warhead adopts a wave rider configuration, literally surfing on the shockwaves it creates while traveling at hypersonic speeds. This aerodynamic design generates lift during the glide phase, enabling the vehicle to execute extreme maneuvers that defeat existing interception algorithms. The missile's operational range stretches between 1,800 and 2,500 kilometers, placing every U.S. base in Japan and Guam within reach from mainland China. Mock-ups visible in Chinese military parades confirm the system's operational status, showing the distinctive flat warhead characteristic of boost glide technology. The Pentagon's response reveals the severity of this threat. They're rushing development of the Glide Phase Interceptor, a completely new system designed specifically to engage hypersonic gliders during their cruise phase. Northrop Grumman, partnering with Japan, won the contract, a high-stakes gamble that eliminates competitive redundancy to accelerate deployment. If their design encounters technical problems, the entire fleet remains exposed for years. While the YJ-17 attacks from above, the YJ-19 transforms every Chinese submarine into a hypersonic launch platform. This scramjet-powered cruise missile achieves a crucial breakthrough: compatibility with standard 533mm torpedo tubes. The engineering significance is substantial. China doesn't need expensive modifications or specialized vertical launch systems. Every diesel-electric submarine in their fleet, even vessels decades old, can now launch weapons that travel at Mach 5 or faster. The YJ-19 maintains this speed throughout its flight using a sophisticated scramjet engine, unlike the unpowered glide of the YJ-17. Traditional anti-submarine warfare assumed submarines needed to approach within torpedo range to threaten carriers. ASW helicopters and destroyers would establish protective perimeters, pushing submarines away from the carrier group's inner sanctum. The YJ-19 obliterates this defensive concept. A submarine lurking 500 to 1,000 kilometers away can launch a hypersonic strike, transforming the vast Pacific from an American lake into a Chinese hunting ground. The simultaneous threat creates an impossible defensive scenario. While radar operators track the high-altitude YJ-17, a YJ-19 skims toward the same target at mid-altitude. Fire control systems must engage multiple hypersonic threats arriving from different vectors, a tactical nightmare that overwhelms even the most sophisticated defense networks. The YJ-17 carries an inherent element that makes every launch a potential trigger for nuclear war. The missile uses the same DF-ZF hypersonic glide vehicle deployed on China's DF-17 ballistic missile, a platform known to carry nuclear warheads. When sensors detect a DF-17 launch, commanders face an impossible decision in seconds. Is the incoming weapon conventional or nuclear? The trajectory provides no answer. The speed allows no time for consultation. This ambiguity isn't a flaw, it's an essential feature of China's deterrence strategy. During the Cold War, both superpowers maintained clear distinctions between conventional and nuclear delivery systems. That separation prevented misunderstandings that could trigger accidental escalation. China has deliberately erased this boundary. Every YJ-17 launch forces American commanders to consider the unthinkable while the seconds tick away. The strategic implication extends beyond the immediate threat. U.S. rules of engagement must now account for potential nuclear response to what might be conventional attack. This hesitation, measured in precious seconds, further erodes the already minimal response window. The mathematics of missile defense have become the primary determinant of naval warfare. Analysis using the YJ-12 as a cost proxy reveals the economic impossibility of sustaining carrier operations against Chinese missiles. Each YJ-12 anti-ship missile costs approximately $1.5 million. The SM-6 interceptor defending against it costs $4 million. The advanced SM-3 costs $18.4 million. China can produce 12 missiles for the price of one SM-3 interceptor. Naval doctrine requires firing multiple interceptors at each incoming threat to ensure destruction, typically a 3-to-1 ratio. An Arleigh Burke destroyer carries approximately $202 million worth of interceptors. The cost for China to overwhelm these defenses, $19 million. That represents 9% of the defensive loadout's value. The hypersonic characteristics of the YJ-17 and YJ-19 will likely demand even higher intercept ratios, perhaps 4 or 5 interceptors per incoming missile. The economic equation becomes more devastating. China wins the financial war before firing the first shot. This isn't theoretical, it's the intrinsic reality of modern naval combat. The U.S. Navy's structure, small numbers of extraordinarily expensive platforms, cannot survive attrition warfare against mass-produced missiles. Every defensive success still represents economic defeat. America's only viable defense against these hypersonic weapons depends entirely on satellites that haven't been launched yet. The hypersonic and ballistic tracking space sensor constellation must provide continuous tracking data from low Earth orbit. Ground-based radars lose hypersonic targets beyond the horizon. Ship radars can't maintain track during the weapon's maneuvering phase. Without persistent space-based sensors, the glide phase interceptor becomes an expensive decoration in vertical launch cells. The HBTSS represents the most critical vulnerability in the entire defensive architecture. If China blinds or destroys these satellites through cyber attack, directed energy weapons, or kinetic interceptors, the Pacific Fleet loses its only warning system against hypersonic attack. The militarization of space accelerates as both nations recognize this dependency. China develops anti-satellite capabilities while America rushes to launch resilient sensor networks. The hypersonic arms race has expanded vertically, making low Earth orbit the newest contested domain. Russia's Zircon missile adds another dimension to the hypersonic threat matrix. Traveling at Mach 8 to Mach 9, the Zircon reportedly generates a plasma cloud during flight that absorbs radio waves, rendering it invisible to radar until terminal approach. The plasma effect, if real, represents the next evolution in hypersonic warfare. Speed alone isn't enough. Future weapons will combine velocity with stealth, creating ghost missiles that appear seconds before impact. America responds with its own hypersonic arsenal. The long-range hypersonic weapon, called Dark Eagle by the Army, uses a common glide body capable of reaching targets 2,776 kilometers away. The Navy will deploy this system aboard Zumwalt destroyers by 2025. The U.S. program acknowledges a fundamental truth: defense against hypersonic weapons may be impossible. Deterrence now requires the ability to strike back with equal speed and devastation. The Pacific becomes a hypersonic standoff where first strike advantage determines survival. The era of carrier invulnerability ended not with combat, but with mathematics. China's YJ-17 and YJ-19 create a reality where defending a carrier strike group costs 11 times more than attacking it. The weapons achieve their ultimate purpose without being fired, forcing American power projection assets beyond effective range. The 90-second window represents more than compressed time. It symbolizes the collapse of 7 decades of naval dominance built on the assumption that carriers could defend themselves. That assumption no longer holds. The Pacific's balance has shifted, measured not in ships or aircraft, but in the terrifying efficiency of weapons that arrive faster than humans can respond.